All right, so thank you for coming to the program recap. We're here to talk about the canine cyanotoxin testing program. And as you know, my name is Amber and I work at the Regional Science Consortium. So I'm just gonna share my screen and jump right in. Okay, can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
All right. So just to give you a quick overview about HABs, which you probably remember, but we haven't chatted since 2019. So I feel like it's just been a really long time. Harmful algal blooms are a global emerging issue. They affect all water bodies all over the planet. And Erie is really, really susceptible to harmful algal blooms. And mostly in the Western Basin, as you can see from this photo that was actually taken from a NASA space station, these harmful algal blooms are present on Lake Erie in such high quantities. You can see them from space. And a lot of times people think that our harmful algal bloom issues come from the Western Basin, but we actually have our own issues here in Lake Erie and in Erie County. So the pictures on the bottom there were taken on Presque State Park over the last couple years, and I have a lot more photos than that, trust me. But harmful algal blooms are they're created when a specific type of bacteria called cyanobacteria starts to bloom out of control in a freshwater body or even a saltwater body. But obviously here we're dealing with freshwater. In Erie County, we have a lot of nutrients that come from agricultural runoff and like from lawn fertilizer treatments that run right into Presque Bay and can cause these algae to feed on those nutrients and then start blooming out of control. So really, like, they've been around for a long time. Cyanobacteria are not new, but the fact that we are overfeeding our systems with all of these nutrients, all of this phosphorus and nitrogen from fertilizing our farms, that is what is really giving them the opportunity to bloom out of control. And truly, the issue with them is that they also produce toxins. So if you remember from our workshop in 2019, these toxins can be really, really harmful to people, but also to our pets. So there are a couple different routes of exposure, and for humans and for animals, we can have direct exposure through our eyes, ears, mouth, throat, and any areas that are covered by a bathing suit or a wetsuit. And we say covered by because the toxins will actually become trapped between your skin and the suit that you're wearing. And the same thing with an animal. If they're swimming in the water, the toxins can be trapped in between their hair follicles or their fur follicles and be trapped against their skin. You can also have the route of exposure through ingestion, and dogs are actually more likely to drink water and they're kind of driven to eat the scum layer in some cases because it tastes weird and it smells funky. So they're really driven more towards eating it and consuming surface water than humans are. The other route of exposure is through inhalation or aspiration. So this is less likely of a dog impact or a dog route of exposure, but as you can see, this guy having fun on a jet ski, the green water that he is jet skiing through could become aerosolized and be sending particles of toxin up into the air that he could then be breathing in. And the thing about all of these routes of exposure is that we don't know their connections to long-term health effects. So if there's a chronic exposure, if you're an avid jet skier or your dog is an avid outdoor enthusiast with you alongside you playing in the water, we don't really know what the long-term exposure is and the health impacts that that can cause. A couple of things to keep in mind specific to dogs and their routes of exposure are, like I mentioned before, directly consuming the water or being driven to eat the algal scum layer or the crusts that can form on the surface of the water, but also self-grooming after they've been in contaminated water can be a problem. If they've been swimming and they're just hanging out in the backyard and they're licking their paws and stuff, then they can also be consuming the toxins that way by licking the algae cells off of their fur. So the signs of Hab poisoning or harmful algal bloom poisoning in humans, they look more like rashes, blisters, and hives, and we can also get some eye and nose irritations from any aerosolized particles. But if swallowed, we can also experience, GI symptoms like diarrhea, abdominal pain, vomiting. We also, under certain circumstances, can experience neurological symptoms like tingling and numbness, dizziness, and headaches. So for pets, but also wildlife and livestock, they're what we're really here to talk about, and they would more likely experience hot spots and skin irritations, but also they could get kind of dizzy, have a little bit of staggering, have trouble breathing, and they could exhibit weakness and excessive salivation, vomiting, and even convulsions. And if you remember from the 2019 workshop, a lot of these symptoms not a lot of them, but the symptoms that as the animal is continuously exposed to the toxin, the symptoms can eventually lead to the death of the animal. So if the dog comes in and they're having really, really bad convulsions, the death might not necessarily be because the toxins were too high of a dose for the animal. It might be that they just can't overcome the symptoms from the exposure, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Okay. So the pets are really what we want to focus on here. So first of all, let's talk about some advice for your patients and how to keep their dogs safe. So you can tell people to avoid contact with water, but that's really, really not likely in our area since we're so in tune with the lake. So what we advise people is to keep an eye out for harmful algae signs. So these signs in the lower corner here under my adorable dog, Chloe, they will be posted at sites that we test regularly if those sites have exceeded for the dog exposure level in the past. The other thing to do is just, check out the water before you let your animal play in it. When in doubt, stay out. That's typically what we say. If it looks discolored or looks kind of scummy, or if you wouldn't want to get in, then maybe don't let your dog get in. If you do get in and you realize later that there is a sign nearby, or maybe the water has changed while you're in it, which can happen, then get your animal out, immediately rinse them off, and make sure that you give them a nice good bath to remove any potential toxins from their fur. And this is a really difficult one, but it's really never a good idea to let pets drink lake or river water, especially during peak harmful algal bloom season, which is from June to September. So directly drinking the water is most of the cause of those high doses of the toxins. So the way that this program functions, or what we would like to be able to do, is provide testing kits to the participating veterinarian offices. And then if you get an animal in the office that has exposure or potentially has the symptoms of exposure to cyanotoxins, we will provide the necessary vials and shipping and everything else that you need to take the samples and send them to our toxins analysis lab, which will then process for all of those different toxins that could be impacting the animal, and then get those results back to us as well as to your office as soon as possible. So the general idea of the program is to determine how many dogs in Erie are getting sick from toxin exposure, and how does that correlate with the amount of toxin in the water at that time. So I'll get to the water thing later on, but let's talk about what's in the test kits. And do you currently have test kits from 2020?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
Awesome. So we can always provide more of any of these materials if you need them. But in each test kit, it should be inside a shipping container, like exhibited by my dogs that really wanted to help me put all this together. The shipping containers are fairly small. They come with 3 Falcon tubes, 1 cryovial, and plastic bags to put each one of those tubes inside, just in case during shipping it breaks open, then you have a secondary containment. And they also should have within them submission forms, sample labels, and then obviously you have the shipping container. So last year we had Erie Animal Hospital, Choice Vets, and Northeast Animal Hospital participating. And obviously you're already part of this, so we want to keep adding more. So if you walk away from here today and you think this might be doable for other offices in the area, then please spread the word. I'm trying to get as much participation as possible so that we can really have a widespread program to not only protect, our furry friends that we love to recreate with, but also to get an understanding of how these toxins are impacting animals as well as people over time. So for the exposure samples, there are 4 different types of samples that can be taken: a hair sample, urine sample, gut contents, and then in the case of if there's a post-mortem situation, then you could take a liver biopsy. We've listed a lot of symptoms for testing, which include things like extreme fatigue, staggering, hot spots, pretty much everything I mentioned before, but some additional things. And the reason for that is because the symptoms are so varied, and the onset of the symptoms can come either very quickly within 15 minutes or after even 4 days. So the symptoms might look different depending on the size of the animal, the breed, how much they have consumed. So even if the animal presents with just hot spots and vomiting, or even just hot spots, just diarrhea, it would be really amazing to just at least have a sample taken and sent up to the lab, because if it comes back to us and it says no cyanotoxin exposure, then that's still information that's valuable to our research project. All right, so this is what the sample labels will look like. The only thing is that since you have boxes from 2020, instead of giving new labels, which I can certainly print if you feel more comfortable with that, but all you have to do is cross out that 2020 or put a 1 through the last 0. You'll have to just write your facility name on the sample label, the date that the sample was taken, and then what type of sample it is. So either hair, urine, gut, or a liver sample. And then I have an example here in this photo showing the sample kind of wrapped all the way around the vial. So that's just important because the way that this worked out, the vials were a little bit smaller than I anticipated. So we just don't want to cover any of that information that's on the sample vial. So you can just, kind of fold the end and sticky it together so that it doesn't get covered up. All right, so the next couple slides are filled with information that was recommended to me by the toxin analysis lab as to how much sample to take and how to keep it cold or freeze it, and then how to ship it. Keep in mind that whatever you do in your facility is more than okay. This is just what we were told. So if you have a different procedure that you do, then that's absolutely fine. So for the hair samples, we were told that the recommendation is a 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter hair sample from the affected animal, and that can be either peri or post-mortem. The hair should be placed in the Falcon tube and labeled properly, and then the tube should be placed in a plastic bag for a secondary containment, and then hair just has to be refrigerated until shipped, but it can be frozen. You'll see in the next couple slides that many of the samples need to be frozen if they're not going to be shipped the same day. And all of this information is also in the 2021 protocol. So if I'm going too fast, it's all written out in there. So there's no need to try to write everything down.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So for the urine samples, the recommendation was about 5 milliliters of a free catch sample. And the scientists that we're working with said either peri or post-mortem is fine. the urine should be placed in one of the falcon tubes, properly labeled in a plastic bag, and then refrigerated if you can ship it the same day, but frozen if you can't ship it until the next day or several days later. And that will come into play when I talk about how the lab receives the samples. And keep in mind that if you want to keep all the samples together, like say an animal comes in and you only get hair and urine and gut contents, then if you want to keep them all together, but you can't ship them for a few days, you can freeze them all. That's totally fine. Which brings me to gut contents. What a fun topic. The recommendation was 5 milliliters of gut contents. And really this is if the animal has vomited at your facility. There's no need to submit this. It's not a necessity. Neither is the urine, by the way. We can get the information we need from the hair samples, but having the additional samples is valuable. So if, the animal happens to vomit while they're in there, then you can collect that as a specimen, and that's an excellent addition to our research. And again, the gut contents can be placed in one of the sterile falcon tubes, labeled, put in a plastic bag, and then refrigerated or frozen, depending on the time of shipping. So the liver biopsy is the last type of sample, and obviously, again, not required because I believe this can only be done post-mortem. So the recommendation was to only take about 200 milligrams of the liver from the affected animal, place the liver sample in the cryovial, and then label it with your facility name, the date, and obviously circle liver. Then you'll want to put the cryovial in the plastic bag and then either refrigerate it or freeze it depending on shipping. So the shipping of the samples will be done through FedEx. So hopefully this is easy enough to accommodate, and if not, we can work out a different arrangement. But the samples will all get shipped to Greg Boyer at the Toxin Analysis Laboratory. So I have the address here, but it's also included in the protocol. And then all of the billing can be done to our FedEx account, which is that account number there. The only thing about the shipping that might be difficult is only to ship always overnight, but only on Monday through Thursday. And the reason for this is that his lab only works Monday through Friday. So if he receives the samples, if they're shipped on Friday, they won't get there until Saturday and no one will be there to receive them. So they'll sit outside his laboratory facility and they will expire. If the samples are shipped overnight on Thursday, he'll at least be in the lab on Friday and can freeze them and store them until he can process them fully the next week. The samples should also have a submission form that is included, and that just really gives the toxin analysis lab both the permission and the information they need to properly run the sample. The most important thing on here is the weight of the animal. So as is typically standard practice, when the animal comes into the lab or comes into the office, they typically get weighed. So if that could be included in the sample submission, that would be great, because that's a necessary part of determining, how the toxin is impacting the animal based on its size, because a different dose of toxin will impact a different size dog. And then if possible, fill out the contact information here. Regardless, all of the information will come to the Regional Science Consortium, but it'll just kind of cut the middleman out, which would be me, and then the information will come directly to you and to me. So you'll just get it sooner if you fill this out, basically. And we have pre-selected for all of these samples. The analysis desired will be all toxins as appropriate, but I just wanted to show you in this pop-out picture here, this is a little snip from the original submission form. And instead of having, you guys fill, check the box every time, I just worked with Greg to create our own submission form. So he knows that it's coming in from this specific program and that it's always going to get all of these toxins processed. But this is really a great panel that he's put together of toxins. It covers all of the microcystins that we test for here in our lab. We test the water once a week for microcystins, but also we test for cylindrospermopsins and anatoxins, and even this paralytic shellfish toxin, which is a saxitoxin. So it's really a great structure that he has here. He's able to run all of these samples in these small enough quantities to get all of this information. So this is the part that might be a little bit more difficult, and we can chat about this afterwards to see how this might work. But we would really like to pair the canine samples with water samples. And this would be completely on us, but we just need some information from the patient and from the vet office in order to get the water sample in a timely fashion. So if possible, you know, if the situation is arises where you do get an animal in, it looks like they have canine or they have cyanotoxin exposure, if possible, would it be, you know, asking them to tell you if the dog has been swimming in a freshwater body in the last 7 days. And if they say yes, then if, you know, if they're able to tell you where the dog was swimming and when the dog was swimming, then that information can be emailed to me. And then what I would do is then run out as soon as possible, probably like the next day or even that same day, and take a water sample. And then I would send that water sample to Greg to his lab to be analyzed with your canine samples. This is really the meat and potatoes of this program. It will enable us to build this relationship between canine exposures and illnesses and what's going on in the actual water. A lot of times when there is a dog illness or a dog death around the Great Lakes, the water isn't tested for several days to several weeks later, and the toxins are already gone. They degrade within several weeks of being present. So if the samples are not kind of taken in a timely fashion from the water, then we might lose a lot of information. So if this is possible, you know, you can just shoot me a quick email, or it can come from one of your technicians or anything like that. And then I will, you know, run out and take the sample as quickly as I can and get that sent off. So there's a checklist inside the protocol, and it just basically says, you know, think before you ship, make sure you have all of your samples labeled properly in Ziploc bags, make sure the sample submission form is completed. You will have to include ice or a cold pack, and you can let me know. I can purchase cold packs if the shippers did not come with them. I honestly can't remember at this point what I sent to everybody. So let me know if you need cold packs, and I can bring some over or send some to your facility. The samples can be shipped the same day, and they don't have to be frozen, or like the same day that they're taken. Or if they're going to be shipped, you know, if you take the sample on a Thursday or on a Wednesday and maybe FedEx doesn't come to you until Friday, then you can freeze them and then send them the next week or whatever. And always overnight. And then if you have a water contact that the patient is able to describe, then you can notify us as soon as possible. And then the results will be sent to you and to us, and we'll get all the information that we need for our study. So the last thing that I wanted to cover was the invoicing for the service fees. So we don't want any costs to come to the pet owner. So we will work with you in whatever capacity that we can, and we can cover service fees up to $150 to collect the samples. I understand that liver biopsies might be a little bit more expensive, and we can definitely talk about that if that should arise. But invoices can be sent to my email, billed to the Regional Science Consortium. If it's easier and preferred, they can always be mailed to us, and that address at 301 Peninsula Drive, as well as my email, are included in your protocol. So you'll have all that information. So if the situation arises and you need to send an invoice, then you just send it wherever it needs to go. So that's all that I have for you. I hope that that wasn't too fast, but I hope it was just fast enough that it wasn't you know, taking up too much of your time. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let you talk a little bit.
Thank you very much. The review was helpful. I do have several questions. You said symptoms could be within minutes to 4 days. And then I think your one screen said, ask if they've been in a lake, stream, or reservoir within the last 7 days. So basically, if they've had any of those symptoms you listed and have had the potential exposure in a lake, stream, or reservoir in the last 7 days, then that's cause to get samples.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then I'm assuming stream also means creek.
Yes.
Okay. And for the hair sample, that's just simply clipped off, right?
Yes.
Okay. Those were my questions.
Okay. Those weren't too bad.